Don't look outside. The truck stop's deadliest rule. The truck stop in Blackridge wasn't like the bustling ones you see along highways, filled with travelers and truckers swapping stories over greasy food and lukewarm coffee. No, this place was something entirely different. It was in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by an ocean of absolute emptiness. By day, the horizon stretched infinitely in every direction, a barren desert of dirt and shrubs, with jagged mountains barely visible in the distance. But at night, it was a completely different world, a pitch-black void, except for the faint, flickering glow of the truck stop's neon sign, which buzzed as if struggling to stay alive. The first thing you felt when stepping out of your car was loneliness. There was no distant sound of traffic, no sign of life, except for the occasional whisper of wind sweeping across the desolate plains. The silence was oppressive, almost unnatural. Even the trucks, massive metallic beasts parked in rows under dim lights, seemed devoid of life, more like abandoned relics than vehicles that had just arrived from the road. I was the new hire, just another drifter passing through, trying to make some quick cash to fund the next leg of my aimless journey. The ad promised good pay, free meals, and a place to sleep in the back. It sounded like an easy job. But now that I was here, something felt off. The night I arrived, the manager, a thin man with a face as weathered as the surrounding landscape, handed me a set of keys and explained my duties. His instructions were clear. Keep the place clean, restock the shelves, and most importantly, lock everything up before midnight. Don't let anyone in after that, he said in an unsettlingly neutral tone. He offered no explanation and I didn't ask. But there was something in his eyes, a restlessness that mirrored my own. It was as if he knew something I didn't, something he wasn't willing to share. As I walked the empty aisles that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that the place wasn't entirely empty. It was something about the way the shadows seemed to shift strangely under the weak fluorescent lights, or how the silence felt too deliberate, like the world was holding its breath. I told myself it was just nerves, a new job in an unfamiliar place. But deep down I knew it was more than that. Something about this truck stop was wrong, as if the very air carried a warning for anyone who stayed long enough to hear it. My first day at the truck stop in Blackridge started off quietly. The manager, a thin man with sunken cheeks and eyes that always seemed perpetually tired, handed me a clipboard with a typed set of rules. He didn't say much at first, just gestured for me to follow him into the small back office, a cramped space with a desk covered in old receipts, a coffee-stained mug, and a monitor displaying security camera footage. "You'll get the hang of it," he murmured almost to himself as he sat down and slid the clipboard across the desk toward me. "But you need to follow these. All of them. No exceptions." The list started off normal like any other job. Keep the shelves stocked and the coffee fresh. Straightforward, I thought. Typical customer service stuff. Nothing strange so far. Clean the bathrooms every 3 hours. Unpleasant, but understandable for a truck stop. He didn't elaborate, though his lips tightened as if there was something more he wanted to say, but didn't. Then, the rules started to take a different turn. Never look out the windows after midnight. I frowned at that one, glancing up at him. "Why?" I asked, trying to sound casual. His eyes quickly flicked to the windows and back to me. "Just don't. If you hear knocking on the glass, ignore it." "What glass?" I asked, already regretting the question. "Any glass," he replied curtly, his tone sharp. "You'll know if it happens. Don't answer the phone after 3 a.m. The phone almost never rings," he added quickly, as if trying to downplay the strangeness of the rule. "But if it does, let it ring. No exceptions." I shifted uncomfortably, feeling the clipboard grow heavier in my hands. The manager leaned forward, his face serious. "Don't look at the cameras for too long." "Why?" I asked again, my voice barely above a whisper. "Sometimes you see things, and sometimes they see you. If someone knocks on the door after hours, don't open it, no matter what they say. Even if they need help." I pressed. "Especially if they need help," he replied, his voice colder than before. "If you smell sulfur, come find me immediately." That was the turning point. "What does sulfur have to do with a truck stop?" I asked, trying to laugh to ease the tension. He didn't laugh back. Instead, he just stared at me, his dark eyes unreadable. "Always finish your shift, no matter what happens." The final rule sent an involuntary shiver down my spine. "What happens if I don't finish?" I asked. He didn't answer, just leaned back in his chair and gestured toward the clock on the wall. "Your shift starts now." As I left the office, the clipboard felt like dead weight in my hands. The rules replayed like a broken record in my mind, their implications gnawing at the edges of my sanity. Some were practical. Others felt like superstitions. And some simply didn't make sense. But the manager's face, his somber tone, and the shadows outside the windows that seemed a little too dense convinced me of one thing. This wasn't a job you quit early. My first shift started simply enough. The tasks were mundane, exactly as the manager had described. Restocking shelves, cleaning counters, keeping the coffee fresh, and, of course, cleaning the bathrooms every 3 hours. It should have been an automatic job, the kind you do on autopilot. But there was nothing automatic about that night. The unsettling atmosphere of the truck stop seemed to close in on me as soon as the sun dipped below the horizon. The neon sign outside cast a faint, sickly glow over the parking lot, its faint buzzing audible even from inside the building. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered intermittently, casting shadows that seemed to move in ways they shouldn't. The silence was the worst part. During the day, I imagined there might be enough background noise to drown out the emptiness, the occasional rumble of a truck arriving, distant conversations, maybe even a radio playing softly. But at night, the silence was so deep it felt almost alive, broken only by strange, sporadic sounds. A metallic clang echoed from the back of the building, followed by what I can only describe as faint scratching, like nails scraping against concrete. I froze, straining to hear more, but the sound stopped as abruptly as it had started. The store's aisles felt endless, even though it was a small space. Each step I took seemed to echo louder than it should, the sound bouncing off the shelves and walls, amplifying every movement I made. I found myself glancing over my shoulder more than once, half expecting to see someone or something standing there. But there was never anyone. At least, no one I could see. By midnight, I had settled into a routine of stocking snacks and restocking the beverage cooler. The monotony helped distract me from the growing unease gnawing at the edges of my thoughts. That was until the lights flickered again, this time staying off for a second longer than usual. The entire store was plunged into darkness for what felt like an eternity, but was likely only a few seconds. When the lights finally came back on, I swear I saw something move in one of the aisles out of the corner of my eye. A shadow, tall and humanoid, vanished quickly from my vision as I turned my head. I told myself it was nothing, a trick of the flickering lights, my mind playing games. Even so, my heart raced in my chest as I gripped the counter tightly, trying to steady my breathing. That's when I noticed the cameras. The screens in the back office displayed the parking lot, the aisles, and the entrance. But now one of the feeds was different. The camera pointed at the farthest corner of the store was static, just a black and white mix of lines and noise. I remembered the rule. Don't look at the cameras for too long. But my curiosity got the better of me. I stared at the static, waiting for it to clear. That's when I saw it, a faint silhouette in the middle of the interference, just for a second, before the screen went completely black. My throat went dry, and I turned away, suddenly hyper-aware of the oppressive silence surrounding me. It was only my first night, and the shift was far from over. The tasks should have kept me busy, distracting my mind from the strange rules and the unsettling silence. But no amount of work could shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, that something or someone was watching me from the shadows. During a rare moment of calm during my shift, curiosity took hold. The store was steeped in an unsettling silence, broken only by the faint hum of the refrigerators and the occasional creak of the building settling. I found myself in the back office, my eyes drawn to the small monitor displaying the security camera feeds. The rule about the cameras echoed in my mind. Don't look at the cameras for too long. But surely, a quick glance wouldn't hurt, right? At first, everything seemed normal. The parking lot was empty except for the still silhouettes of the parked trucks. Inside, the aisles were intact, the lights flickering slightly. The screen showing the road beyond the parking lot was an endless void, a darkness broken only by the faint outlines of distant hills. It was calm, almost too calm. Then I saw it. On the camera pointed toward the far edge of the parking lot, a figure stood just outside the illuminated area. At first I thought it might be a resolution issue, a video glitch, or perhaps a trucker stepping out for a smoke. But no, it was different. The figure was tall and vaguely humanoid, but its movements were wrong, shaky, like a puppet being manipulated by unsteady hands. It swayed unnaturally, its limbs bending at impossible angles. I leaned closer, my breath caught in my throat. The figure seemed to be looking toward the truck stop, or perhaps directly at the camera. I couldn't be sure. Just as I opened my mouth to call the manager, the screen flickered, and static briefly filled the image. When the feed returned, the figure was gone. I blinked, staring at the now empty parking lot, my heart pounding in my ears. Had that been real? A trick of the light? My mind playing games after hours of uneasy silence? I wanted to believe it was nothing, but the knot in my stomach told me otherwise. And then I remembered the rule. Don't look at the cameras for too long. Suddenly, the rule felt less like an eccentricity and more like a warning. A warning I had ignored. The silence around me now felt heavier, charged with a tension I couldn't explain. I quickly turned off the monitor, the screen going dark with a faint click. I didn't look at the cameras again that night, and whatever I had seen or thought I had seen, I prayed it wouldn't come closer. It was past midnight when a lone trucker entered. The sound of the heavy glass door opening snapped me out of my thoughts, echoing unervingly through the empty store. He walked in, his boots clunking on the linoleum floor, and gave me a wide grin, just a little too wide. At first glance, he seemed normal. Middle-aged, unshaven, a stained cap pulled low over his forehead. A typical trucker, I thought. But something about him unsettled me almost immediately. Quiet night, huh? He said, his voice raspy but overly friendly, the kind of tone that seemed meant to disarm me. He stood near the door for a moment, looking around the store as if he wanted to absorb every detail. Always is around here. I nodded, forcing a polite smile. Yeah, not much traffic at this hour. He laughed, a sound that seemed to echo longer than it should in the silence. Not much of anything at this hour. He approached the counter, his eyes scanning the shelves as he walked, but it didn't feel casual. It felt deliberate. New here? He asked, leaning a little too far over the counter. His breath had a faint smell of coffee and something metallic. Yeah, just started today, I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral. Thought so, he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, which narrowed slightly. You've got that fresh, eager look. Bet you don't even know half of what goes on around here. I frowned, his words hitting an unsettling note. What do you mean by that? He ignored the question, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a crumpled dollar bill. A pack of gum, he said casually, sliding the money across the counter. As I rang up the purchase, he kept his eyes on me, his expression unreadable. Have you seen the rules? He asked suddenly, his tone almost playful. Yeah, I replied cautiously. The manager made sure of it. His smile faltered for a moment, replaced by something colder. Good. You'd better follow them. I didn't know what to say, so I stayed quiet, sliding the gum across the counter. He didn't take it right away, just stood there, staring at me as if he were weighing something in his mind. They don't tell you everything, you know, he said finally, his voice dropping to a low murmur. Not in the rules, at least. There are things they leave out, things you have to figure out for yourself. I swallowed hard, my hands beginning to sweat. Like what? He laughed again, softer this time. You'll see. Finally, he grabbed the gum, shoving it into the pocket of his jacket. As he turned to leave, he stopped, casting a glance over his shoulder. Oh, one more thing? I braced myself, expecting some ominous warning. Keep your head down. His voice was quiet but firm, the kind of tone that sent chills up your spine. Especially if you hear something out there. Pretend you didn't. Just keep your head down. With that he left, the door closing behind him with a hollow thud. I stood there frozen, his words echoing in my mind. The air felt heavier, colder, as if the store had absorbed his presence. I didn't know what he meant, nor why he seemed so certain that I would see. But something in his tone made me believe him. Whatever he knew, it wasn't something I wanted to understand anytime soon. It was 3 a.m., the hour I had been warned about. The store was eerily silent. I had almost convinced myself that the rest of the night would pass without incident when the phone rang. The sound shattered the silence, sharp and unnerving. My breath caught as I stared at the phone on the counter, its rotary dial trembling with each shrill ring. The rule flashed in my mind like a red alert. Don't answer the phone after 3 a.m. I should have ignored it. I should have let it ring. But curiosity, reckless and overwhelming, got the better of me. With a trembling hand, I picked up the phone and raised it to my ear. "Hello," I whispered, my voice barely audible. At first there was only static, crackling softly in my ear. I frowned, about to hang up, when I heard it, a voice. Distorted, low and unnatural, as if someone or something was speaking through a broken speaker. "Liam," it whispered, dragging out each syllable. The sound sent a chill down my spine, freezing me in place. I didn't recognize the voice, but somehow it knew me. Not just my name, it knew things. "You didn't want this job, did you?" it hissed, the tone almost mocking. "You thought it would be easy. A quick way to make money." My pulse raced as it continued, describing things about me, memories, fears, thoughts, that no one could possibly know. Childhood secrets, mistakes I'd never spoken about, doubts I hadn't even admitted to myself. "Regretting it already?" the voice asked, a distorted note of amusement creeping into its words. I opened my mouth to respond, to demand who or what it was, but before I could speak, the line went dead. The silence that followed was deafening, as if the air around me had been sucked out of the room. I stared at the phone in my hand, my mind racing. How did it know my name? How did it know everything about me? My hands trembled as I placed the phone back on the receiver, the echo of the distorted voice still ringing in my ears. The rule was clear. Don't answer the phone after 3 a.m. Now I understood why. And as the oppressive silence returned to the store, I realized something else. I wasn't alone. Whatever had called me hadn't left. It was still there, watching, waiting. The sound started around 3:30 a.m., a faint dragging noise, like boots scraping against gravel, coming from the direction of the fuel pumps. At first, I tried to ignore it, convincing myself it was just the wind scattering loose debris. But the sound persisted, irregular and unsettling. It wasn't the wind. Something or someone was out there. The rules were clear. Don't go outside after hours. But curiosity, which had already betrayed me once, was eating away at me again. I couldn't shake the feeling that ignoring it might be worse than investigating. So, taking a deep breath and clutching the keys rattling in my trembling hand, I unlocked the door and stepped outside. The night air was cold, biting against my skin. The faint buzz of the neon sign above cast a weak glow, but beyond the reach of its light, everything was shrouded in darkness. The fuel pumps stood still, silent, their silhouettes outlined against the void beyond. As I approached, the dragging sound stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. That's when I noticed footprints in the gravel, leading away from the pumps and toward the edge of the parking lot, where the light faded into darkness. They were strange, almost human, but not quite. The proportions were off, the toes too long, the spacing between the steps abnormal, as if whatever had made them was stumbling rather than walking. I followed the trail for a few steps, each movement growing heavier, as if the air around me were thickening. That's when I saw them. Symbols etched into the ground near the pumps. They were crude yet precise, spiraling shapes and jagged lines that made no sense but filled me with an overwhelming sense of unease. It felt wrong to look at them, as if they weren't meant for my eyes. The symbols seemed to faintly glow, as though the earth itself was alive. Suddenly, the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. An overwhelming sensation of being watched washed over me, suffocating and undeniable. My breath caught, and I froze, my eyes darting toward the darkness beyond the parking lot. There was nothing, no movement, no sound, but the feeling only grew stronger, like the unrelenting gaze of a predator. I wanted to run, to bolt back inside and lock the door, but my legs felt rooted to the ground. Slowly, against every instinct screaming at me, I turned my head to look behind me, half expecting to see a figure standing there. Nothing. But the sensation didn't leave. It grew more intense, heavier, as if something was just out of my line of sight, waiting for me to lower my guard. Finally, I forced myself to move, my feet crunching against the gravel as I stumbled back to the door. My heart pounded so loudly that I could barely hear anything else. As soon as I slammed the door shut and locked it, I didn't dare look back through the glass. I didn't want to see if something or someone had followed me back inside. The next morning, I barely had time to settle into the office before the manager rushed in. His face was pale, his eyes wide with a mix of panic and something worse, fear. He didn't bother with greetings or formalities. "What did you do?" he demanded, his voice low but trembling. "What exactly did you do last night?" I hesitated, my mind racing. How could he know? I hadn't told anyone. The cameras wouldn't have shown me outside for long, just enough to investigate. I stepped out for a moment, I admitted, my voice weak. There was a noise near the pumps. I thought. "You thought?" he interrupted, his tone sharp as a knife. He ran a hand through his gray hair, pacing back and forth in the small office, like a caged animal. "Did you forget the rules? Did you think they were just suggestions?" "I wasn't out there for long," I protested, trying to defend myself. "I didn't see anything, not really." He stopped pacing and stared at me, his expression shifting from anger to something colder. "You don't have to see anything for them to notice you. The rules aren't just for your safety, they're for all of us. When you break them, you draw their attention." "Who?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Who are they?" His eyes flicked to the window, and then back to me. He didn't answer the question. Instead, he leaned in closer, lowering his tone. "If you mess up again, you won't make it through the night. Do you understand?" I nodded, the weight of his words sinking into me like a stone in my stomach. My hands were sweaty, my pulse racing. "I'm sorry," I mumbled. "It won't happen again." He sighed, his shoulders sinking slightly, though the tension in his face didn't ease. "Sorry won't save you if they decide to come back. Just follow the rules. All of them. No exceptions." With that, he turned and left the room, leaving me alone with my thoughts. The silence that followed was deafening, filled with unspoken questions and the lingering echo of his warning. Whatever I had done, whatever attention I had attracted, it was clear I was playing a game I didn't understand, and the stakes were much higher than I could have imagined. The next shift started like the one before, a disturbing silence that felt heavier now, knowing what I had done. I tried to stay busy, restocking shelves, brewing fresh coffee, and scrubbing counters that were already clean. But no task could shake the sense of dread that hung over me. Something was coming. I could feel it. Around midnight, the cameras began to flicker. I froze, staring at the monitor in the back office. At first it was just static, the same interference I had seen before. But as the screen cleared, I saw them. Figures moving around the edges of the truck stop, almost invisible at the border of the parking lot where the lights didn't reach. They didn't walk like people. Their movements were jerky, unnatural, as if they were struggling to control their own bodies. One by one, they started to approach, slow but deliberate, their forms becoming clearer as they stepped into the faint glow of the parking lot lights. I couldn't make out faces, if they even had faces, but the way they moved made my stomach knot. It was wrong. The phone rang, snapping me out of my trance. I jumped, the shrill sound echoing through the empty store. My heart raced as I stared at it. It wasn't just a single ring. It kept ringing incessantly, as if daring me to answer. I knew what I was supposed to do. I knew the rule. But as the ringing grew louder in my mind, a part of me wondered, what if ignoring it is worse? Against my better judgment, I picked up the phone. Before I could say anything, the distorted voice erupted through the static, louder and angrier than before. "You shouldn't have broken the rules," it hissed. "Now they're coming. You did this." "Who's coming?" I asked, my voice trembling. "They're here?" The line crackled, the voice dissolving into a guttural growl before going completely silent. I slammed the phone back onto the hook, the sound echoing in the oppressive silence that followed. My breathing was shallow, my hands shaking. I looked back at the monitors. The figures were closer now, circling the building. The parking lot lights flickered, casting their distorted shadows against the walls. Inside the store, things were wrong too. The shelves creaked as if under some invisible weight. A pile of snacks toppled over with a loud crash, but no one had touched it. I backed up to the counter, gripping its edge as my eyes scanned every corner of the room. The shadows seemed to stretch and shift unnaturally, drawing closer with every flicker of the lights above. I was no longer alone. A faint tapping sound drew my attention to the windows. At first it was soft, like a branch brushing against the glass. But it grew louder, more persistent. I didn't dare look. I remembered the rule. Never look at the windows after midnight. The lights above dimmed, flickering more erratically. My reflection in the glass became distorted, warped, as if the shadows outside were pressing against the windows, trying to get in. Then I heard it, a low whisper, like the wind, but with words I couldn't fully understand. It came from all directions, an echo that seemed to rise from the very walls. The shelves began to vibrate. The tapping on the glass turned into pounding, and I realized with a sickening clarity, I was trapped. There was no way to run, no place to hide. Whatever I had done, whatever I had drawn to this place, wasn't going to let me escape so easily. And the night was far from over. As the whispers grew louder, the lights flickered more violently, plunging the truck stop into darkness for long seconds at a time. The shadows seemed alive, sliding along the walls, drawing closer. I was cornered. The front door wouldn't budge, the back door wouldn't either, and the windows seemed indestructible. My heart pounded as my mind desperately searched for a way out, any way out. Then the noise stopped. The silence that followed was even worse. It was oppressive, almost deafening. The only thing I could hear was the sound of my own heartbeat and the short, ragged breaths I couldn't control. That's when I noticed. The shadows weren't just on the walls. They were on the floor, near my feet, still and waiting. Summoning what little courage I had left, I ran to the back office. Maybe there was something there, a weapon, a radio, a phone that could connect me to the manager or the police. But when I entered the office, the glow of the camera monitor caught my eye. I didn't want to look, but something seemed to compel me. On the monitor, the split screen showed footage from outside the building. The figures that had been outside were no longer there. They were inside. Each camera showed a different part of the truck stop, and in each frame, there was a figure standing still but unmistakably present. Some were tall and thin, others disproportionately wide, as if their bodies had been molded into impossible shapes. They were there, in the snack aisle, by the coffee station, near the front door. My stomach churned when I noticed there was one more camera, and it showed the office where I was. The image was clear. I was sitting at the desk, but I wasn't alone. Behind me, A shadow loomed, growing, shaping itself into something far larger than I was. Suddenly, the monitor turned off, plunging the office into total darkness. An icy chill coursed through my body, every fiber of my being telling me not to turn around. But it was futile. I knew something was there, as real as the floor beneath my feet. I took a deep breath, bracing myself for the inevitable, but before I could react, something cold touched my shoulder. Everything went black. I woke up to sunlight hitting my face. I was lying on the store floor, surrounded by intact shelves and perfectly working lights. Everything looked normal, too normal, as if the previous night had been nothing more than a nightmare. But I knew it wasn't. My body ached, my mind was foggy, but something felt different. Everything seemed more quiet. When I stood up, I noticed the manager was there, standing behind the counter. But he didn't look at me. He didn't say anything. He just stood there, fiddling with the same bag of coffee I had stocked the night before. I walked over to him, struggling to find the words. What happened last night? What were they? He finally looked at me, but his eyes were empty, as if all the life had been drained out of him. You didn't leave, he murmured. It doesn't matter what you saw. It doesn't matter what you felt. You didn't leave, and now you're one of us. Before I could understand, he disappeared, like a shadow being wiped away by the light. And that's when I noticed the reflection in the glass door. It wasn't me anymore. My face was there, but it was hollow, expressionless, with eyes as dark as the night I had endured. The truck stop was quiet, but I knew. I was part of it now. The rules were no longer instructions for me. I was one of them. If you love mysteries and the supernatural, subscribe to the channel for more content like this. Leave a like to support the work and share with friends who are into the supernatural. Your engagement keeps these secrets alive.